Justin Trudeau celebrating the news that inflation dropped down to 2%. Are Canadians really saving at the grocery store? Now, this video is probably a better depiction of what's been happening with the consumer price index, or inflation rates over the past couple of years.
That's the cost of living crisis. Suddenly we went up from prices being around there to prices being there. And you don't really see that in this data, okay? Because inflation is really just measuring the difference between that and that. And if you look at those two lines, you're talking about a 2.3% change. That's the number we're talking about today. But for a lot of people, it's not about that. It's about the difference between this and that. And when you look at the difference between this and that's 20%. And I think that's the dichotomy here between these inflation numbers where it looks normal and this, which is really not normal at all.
No, it's not normal. Well, it's become the new normal. And of course, yes, patting themselves on the back for a 2% inflation rate is one thing. But now inflation is actually not rising prices. That's just the effects of inflation. Inflation is, in fact, a rise in the monetary supply. Now, we'll get into that a little later in the video, but how do we measure that? Well, we use the Consumer Price Index, and this is right from the government's website here, from statscan.gc.ca, where you can go have a look at the Consumer Price Index. Now, most people would think, and this is kind of the general consensus, that all governments use the same price index, which is a basket of goods. Well, they don't. Newsflash, the government of the United States doesn't use the same index as the government of Canada, as the government of Zimbabwe or Britain. It doesn't matter where you go. They're different price index. So we all use a different measure. We use a different ruler for measuring price rising or lowering or what have you. And guess what? If the numbers don't look good, well, they can just change what's in the basket of goods to make it look better. Like, say, for example, if the prices of cellular services are going up, which many Canadians know all about, well, they'll just change the numbers and how they measure that. Here's a news release from the CPI News. New approach to estimating the cellular services price index. With this release, the cellular services price index is now calculated using an enhanced methodology and new data sources. For more information, please consult the technical paper. You can go have a look at that yourself. I'll leave a link in the description down below. But hey, one thing they like to do is add things that are lowering, and they change this all the time. It's literally changed constantly. So there's no real good measure for this. But hey, one of the things they can add recently is the drop in real estate prices across Canada. Canadian real estate prices slip further on weakening demand and rising inventories as better dwelling, as they've reported on this. I was talking about this yesterday, but you can look here. Over the past 12 months, home prices have generally weakened further. Annual growth remains negative, with prices at 3.9%. So basically, if you lost $30,000 worth of equity, which Canada as a whole did on average over the past 12 months, well, they're going to include that in the price index so that it makes things look good. But they're not going to add things like rent. They'll lower what they call the weights of those measures. So they'll just weigh that less in the basket of goods. But hey, when you talk to the politicians, they'll paint you a rosy picture of what's happening here in Canada.
Before diving into the new mortgage rules, I'd just like to say a couple of words about the Canadian economy. We've had some positive news over the past few months. We have now had inflation down within the Bank of Canada's target range for 7 months in a row. And in July, inflation hit a 40-month low. We've seen the Bank of Canada lead the G7 in cutting interest rates. Canada has now been the first G7 country to cut interest rates for the first time, the first G7 country to cut interest rates for the second time, and the first G7 country to cut interest rates for the third time.
Now, were those interest rates premature? Is this going to lead to further inflation down the road? Well, only time will tell, but I think predictions are leading in that direction. Now, of course, higher interest rates would be the cure. Higher interest rates meaning the government is printing less money and doling that out through government spending. But how is the government going to keep spending? Well, they're going to keep spending. We'll get into that in just a minute. But hey, you know what is going down? Well, the popularity of the Liberal Party. This is why they have to make press releases like this. Hey, Justin Trudeau, says Marty Up North. Do you know what else is dropping? Your popularity. Call an election. Let Canadians decide if we have confidence in you and your policies. And even Andrew Coyne is pointing this one out, that the Liberals are in 4th place across Canada. This has never happened in our history. In 2011, they were 3rd place. This is insane. And in 2011, they were at the lowest they'd ever been. And now they're in 4th. That says a lot. But what is rising in Canada? Well, you can see real prices here, like people who rent properties. If you don't own your own house, and your mortgage rates are going up, probably. Well, your rents are going up. Rent inflation in Canada surges again to a 40-year high at 8.9% year over year. Yeah, we're not doing quarterly with it when it comes to rents. We're going year over year. Yes, 8.9%. That is a lot. Stats Canada left this entirely out of their release today. Canada is experiencing deflation and high unemployment with surging rent inflation. This is incredibly dangerous. It is absolutely incredibly dangerous. Tack on to that mass immigration like the country has never seen, and we're in a world of disaster there. Now, City News reporting food items that got more expensive in August and which ones saw prices go down. Now you can go through this article and it's really interesting. They're pointing out a bunch of these different items. Of course, dairy. That's an interesting one because that's largely controlled by the supply management of the dairy lobby. But one thing to note is things go up and down quarterly because of being in season or not. And famously, Jagmeet Singh with his bag of potatoes, the bag of apples that he was actually holding, they were at a high price because he was buying them out of season. They will drop down to a lower price. You can't really measure inflation based on annual, in season or out of season prices. You have to measure those year over year, and that's how that works. Now, if you don't take my word for it, listen to Peter Schiff. He's the one who accurately predicted the 08 financial crisis down in the United States. Oh, and they hit us. We largely survived that one because of our fiscal policy at the time, which we've thrown out the window since. But he's talking about what inflation actually is. It's not rising prices. It's actually rising monetary supply.
Inflation is really just another tax because governments create inflation. Inflation is also probably one of the most misunderstood words in the English language, and deliberately so. I think governments around the world kind of led the campaign to redefine inflation. So if you go back to the origin of the word, and if you have a dictionary, even from the 1980s, a Webster's dictionary, you'll get the real definition of inflation. So inflation is an expansion of the money supply. That's all it is. Deflation is a contraction of the money supply. So if you even think about the word inflate is to expand, like a balloon. If you fill a balloon with air, it expands. So with inflation, what's being expanded is the money supply. Who expands the money supply? Governments. Inflation
Absolutely.
is really...
Governments are the ones who inflate the monetary supply. And if you look at the M1 numbers, well, it paints a pretty picture here. It's been going up exponentially, especially around when Trudeau came to office. And that's to spend government money. They're not actually taxing you today and getting that money and then spending it. No. They're borrowing it from, the future. They're borrowing it from the future, and they're borrowing it from your savings. And that's why Peter Schiff calls it a tax, because they're just, expand the monetary supply and all of your savings goes down in value. So they're robbing the value out of the money that you have. If you want to save some of that money or some of the value in that money, a lot of people are going into precious metals. This is why the New World Precious Metals is expanding so much and so many people are going to them. If you want, click this, pause the video, take the screen cap of that QR code. It'll send you over there, and you can get set up to take some of your savings and keep the wealth in that savings, because look at what's happening. Now you'll see a little dip here. This is when the interest rates started going up. It started dipping, and it's going back up. At the very tip, that's us going back up as the interest rates are rising again. But this is government spending too much money. And in fact, they've spent more money in the past 9 years than, well, any other government Canada has ever seen. This is True North reporting. Canada's debt doubles under Trudeau. Food insecurity, housing, and crime follow suit. A new analysis of Canada's indebtedness shows that during Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's time in office, the national debt has doubled to over $1.232 trillion. So it was just above $600 billion. It's a lot of money. Don't get me wrong. That is a lot of money, but it took the entirety of our existence as a nation to get to that point, and he doubled it in less than a decade. Calculations done by the Canadian Taxpayer Federation revealed that the country is in much worse shape than before the Liberals took over on several fronts. While the debt officially doubled in August 30th, food insecurity has more than doubled. Housing costs have increased by around 63%, and crime has increased too. Well, housing has increased more than 63% over the past decade. It's increased hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of percent in the past few decades. Trudeau took office in November 2015 when Canada's federal debt was $616 billion. To double the debt, he had reached 1.232 trillion. By 2023, 2024, the federal debt reached 1.215 trillion, according to CTF analysis. And the debt increases by, this is crazy, $39.8 billion annually, or by $109 million a day. $109 million a day. This is what our government is doing, increasing the debt in Canada. It's ridiculous. Now, here's the thing about interest charges. This is where we're just throwing our money away. The government is just taking our money, and because of their reckless spending, they're just throwing it in, they're burning it up. Interest rates on the federal debt will cost $54 billion just this year. $54 billion just to service the debt that we've already accrued. Why does that sound familiar? What it's going to cost to service the debt. It's like somebody told Trudeau this years ago.
Regardless of what that figure is exactly, future governments are going to have to carry that debt. The servicing costs on that are going to be very high.
Sorry?
The servicing costs on the debt that you're going to have to carry, that you're adding to now, right?
Interest rates are at historic lows, Glenn.
Okay, but it's still a lot of money.
No.
It's still a lot of money.
No.
And you don't know where. Okay, but how are you going to pay for that? How are you going to pay for those costs in future years? Are you going to increase taxes, or are you going to cut programs?
Okay. Well, forget about his answer at the time. Let's look at the answer now. What has been going on? Meaning the Liberals are spending more in interest charges than they are sending to provinces in health transfers. So the money that's from the federal government that's supposed to be going to healthcare, they're spending more than that in interest, just servicing the debt. The money spent on federal debt interest is the same amount collected through GST. So all the money that you're paying in GST every time. Remember back in the day, Mulroney brought GST. It was supposed to be a temporary thing. I mean, nothing is more permanent than a temporary government solution. But it was brought about to balance the budget. That's what it was brought about now. Now, what is it there for? It is there just to pay for servicing this debt that this government has brought on us. Congratulations. Every time you go buy something and you pay that GST, you're just servicing the debt that Trudeau has accrued. This is crazy. Rather than funding essential services, every penny Canadians pay in GST goes towards paying down interest on the federal debt. And I think that is absolutely a crime. This is a tax that we shouldn't even have in Canada. Now, this is just insane. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre shared a post from Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, who's been on the channel. He's great, also known by his alias on X, the Food Professor, on Tuesday. Now, what is this that he shared? Well, this is it on Instagram. The Food Professor saying in 2024, around 9.39 million Canadians are affected by food insecurity. According to Stats Canada, back in 2015, this number was approximately 4.45 million. Since Trudeau's election, the number of Canadians experiencing some level of food insecurity has increased by 111%. And yet he goes on social media and brags that he's giving kids food at school, when only 10 years ago, parents could afford to feed their kids themselves. And of course, this is where we're going with this, where more and more largesse of government is needed. They say that, Canadians aren't doing great, so we need to provide these services. And this is where they're going with it, by spending more and more money, driving us further and further and further into debt. This is economic ruin for our nation. What do you think? Leave a comment in the comment section down below. Let me know what you think about this and all the things that I discussed in this video today. And of course, we'll see you all in the next one. Keep on trucking.